The question is, do children need to be protected, and raising the Bill Henson debate?
I think one of the things, when I was talking about the uncle and aunt role, I think it's about, I think we do need to create spaces where kids and young people feel safe. Do they need to be protected in the way the Sun Herald or The Age is talking about when they talk about Henson or going out till 3 in the morning? I don't think so. I think that's a different issue. But I do think we need to create those safe kind of environments. I've said this, but I'm going to, because I think it is important. There was an incident that happened to me. In the writing of this book, it was very early on, and I was on a train with, it was quite a crowded train. There's a group of high school boys that were swearing their heads off. They were being quite aggro. They were just being young boys, but there was an old woman sitting down just behind them, and she was so embarrassed. She was, you could just see her just becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And I leaned over and I said to one of these boys, "Hey mate, just tone it down. You've got, some of us don't want to hear what this language." Worst thing to say, because the spray came on me. I was humiliated. It didn't help this old woman. And I was just furious. And I was so furious that all I could think of was, I wish I lived 30 years ago where I could knock you around the ear. That was, my first response was a violent response. And I think it's in the book that often is our response, our unthinking response to these kind of things, is this violence or this aggression or this. But when I got off the train and I calmed down and kind of walked, I just got this feeling of massive sadness. This is the only way to describe it, because I thought, how is it that you just have, that we haven't taught young people, like the really simplest thing, that you respect your elders. Like just that you show that kind of respect. And that's where I didn't feel angry at those young boys anymore. I felt angry at my generation for not kind of creating a world in which they grew up where they learnt that. And if you read the book, I think that you'll understand why that incident has kind of echoes throughout the chapters.
I actually wanted to ask whether the slap, whether you'd actually there was any autobiography in the kind of the key event in the book, that you'd ever seen a kid being slapped. And
I think the most common one, we've all must have it at supermarkets or, where. And also, I think there was a very small incident. I've talked about this, so I'll be quick, where I was at a barbecue at Mum and Dad's, and it is kind of it's the idea that took flight, if you like, where Mum was cooking in the kitchen and a little boy was just being a bit of a terror, getting in her way. She was making 150 things, and he was, taking out the pots and pans. I think he was drumming. He was wanting to be a drummer, and Mum just went, stop, and then when he wasn't listening, I'm going to demonstrate on you, she just turned him around and just hit him on the backside like this. It wasn't at all hard, it wasn't at all an aggressive moment, but the little boy turned around to her and went, "No one has a right to touch my body without my permission." My mum was like, You're naughty, you're getting smacked. That's as simple as that. And that's what we all did. We all laughed. The parents were there, we all laughed. It was really funny. But it wasn't until I kind of walked away from that, I just thought, that's really interesting about the generational change between my mother's experience of youth. And I wrote about this in Dead Europe. Like, some of what came in Dead Europe was from my mum's stories. And, she remembers coming back from church, she looked at a boy askance, and as soon as she walked in the house, her two brothers started bashing her, not smacking her, not slapping her, punching her for looking at a boy sideways. And so I just thought, there's this amazing road that's been travelled between the experience of my mother as a child to the experiences of this little boy. And I wrote it down in my notebook, and it stayed and became something called the slap.
Yes, you got.
Sorry for you.
No, that's good. Thank you. Do you think that the generation nowadays, the youth, they, I think about, I say, 50 years ago, perhaps if you got an education, you had a light to go to and there was positive experience. if you work hard, but nowadays there's no certainty, and that sort of to a road to success. Does that create a lot of molds of people that there's no light at the end of the tunnel?
There's actually so much compacted into that question, and I'm not going to pretend that I can answer that. I mean, that really is one of the dialogues and debates that you want something you write to start with. I will say very quickly to that, I talked really early on tonight about feeling really fortunate about the education my parents made possible for me, and I think that was really significant. And, kind of, encouraging me to read, like buying me books, even when they couldn't read English, like just going out and coming to a bookshop like this and just choosing something off the shelf. And one of the great sadnesses for me, I've used that word a fair bit, haven't I, but is that I think that the gulf that is emerging between a public and a private education in this country is a real shame. It's actually one of the great failures, not only of Liberal governments, but a succession of Liberal and Labor governments in this country, that we have the highest, I don't think I'm wrong, I think we have the highest rate of private school education in the OECD world. And that is, I can only use the word shameful. And I think there is a class difference being created to do with education in our society.
Yes, there's a question here. The question was, does Christos research his characters or just draw from experience?
It depends on the novel I'm writing. Say with Dead Europe, there's a lot of interviews and a lot of research. With this one, it was a lot. I mean, it was just actually drawing from my observations of the world, from my imagination. Really, that was the pleasure that I think I talked about in writing. But I did say with Manolis, like I did actually sit down with old, and not only Greeks but old people, and just kind of ask questions. Some embarrassing, do you have sex? I mean, which can be a very hard thing to ask your mum or dad.
I just want to hear the answer. Not the answer.
No, I mean, I think people are very generous, that's what I've found. There is a concern, I'll be really honest, there is a concern that because this is such a book about families, and because it so much occurs and takes place in our world, that you worry, that people will feel like I've stolen from them. I hope I haven't done that, but that is a concern, because there is that element of writing where you do take from the things you see and the things you hear. And I used, even when I was reading that Richard chapter, I was conscious I used the term art fag that a friend of mine's child uses all the time. And I thought, wow, that's such a great term to describe a young teenage pufter, it's a really good term. So with this book, I drew from my imagination, but my imagination is not separate from the way I exist in the world, I guess.
What about Loaded?
Loaded was written very much with Loaded was written from within myself. Like, I didn't do any research. It was like, not that it is completely autobiographical, but Ari's a bit of an alter ego for me. I think I discovered in the writing of Loaded. And it was like, he has this cameo walk-in part in The Slap. And the reason for that was I was actually going to write a whole chapter from Ari's point of view. And then I realised that he didn't fit into this novel. But I want to keep him there because he's a bit of an alter ego. I think I'll keep returning to him in some ways.
Hanif Qureshi does that in his latest novel. He has the character one of the characters from My Beautiful Laundrette having a kind of scene in something to tell you. Anyway, was there one more question over here? Yeah.
That was just interesting, I thought, because I thought it was quite pivotal.
The question was about Gary, who's Rosie's alcoholic husband.
Look, after I did the first draft of the book, I'd actually had not written a chapter in either Rosie or Gary's voice, and I think that was the whole I don't want to give it a spoiler. Look, I had actually done their story through Shamira's eye. And then I knew I had to abandon that because we really needed to hear the voice of one of the parents. And I think the choice came down for me in the end to Rosie because I became really fascinated in the relationship between the three women, about the friendship between Aish and Anouk and Rosie, and that kind of dictated my choice. It was really difficult because there was a point where I kind of thought, you know, I could actually not end this book. Like I could, you know, there's you know, and for a while I actually even played with the idea of having the young boy as one of the voices as well.
It sounds like what you did was choose also the challenges, because in fact you chose to write about a female character and not a character where you could have talked more about class. There's a lot about class already, and if you'd gone down the Gary road you would have ended up, I think, in a more predictable route possibly.
One of the things I was thinking about was that in some ways Harry answers Gary, or there's a relationship between both these men who come from working class backgrounds, but very different kind of working class backgrounds. One is the WOG working class background, and one is the Anglo-Celtic one. And Harry's on his way up, and Gary's on his way even further down.
You can see a lot of Harry through the story with other people.
Okay, I think people can keep talking to Christos when they come to get their book signed, or just go up to him anyway.
So really quickly, I'm actually halfway through this book. I started it on yesterday, and it is actually a terrific read. And I really appreciate Sophie doing this tonight. But you know, there's a further discussion we can do about the use of multiple voices with this book. So I just want to take the moment to really recommend it. I think Anna is an incredible creation, mate.
Thank you. And now, we should be clapping Christos at this point, I think. So.